Hello. I think I'm just going to let those last people sit down before we start. Yes, we have. So thank you very much for joining this afternoon's session on what's next on the corporate wish list for Swift GPI. I'm Helen Sanders. I'm an independent consultant and outgoing editor of TMI, Treasury Management International. It's a real pleasure to be here with a really fantastic panel. I'm going to ask them to introduce themselves, actually, but we have two banks and two corporates. So if a fight breaks out, it should be relatively even. Søren, perhaps I could ask you first, just to introduce yourself.
Yes. Well, I'm Søren Haugaard. I am from Danske Bank in Copenhagen, and I'm here representing one of the banks, but also as part of the SWIFT board and heading up the corporate advisory group. Hopefully I can add some interesting aspects to the discussion.
Great. So what Søren's saying is that because he is chair of the CAG, then he is sort of adding extra weight to the bank team, is what he's actually saying. So thank you. JP.
JP Jolly from Bank of America Merrill Lynch. I'm responsible for financing and channels. So that includes trade, cards, innovation, and obviously channels, as I said. And I'm based out of New York.
Great.
Hi, I'm Brooke Tilton with Viacom Inc. We are the parent company for cable channels like MTV Networks, Nickelodeon. We also are the parent company of Paramount Pictures. We're based out of New York. I handle the U.S. liquidity, bank account management, and financing. And I also do system implementations for our team worldwide.
Great, thank you. And finally, Bart.
Yeah, thank you. I'm not wearing a tie, so I'm at the corporate side. My name is Bart Verwij. I work at Booking.com for the past 6.5 years. I work in the treasury team that's based in Amsterdam, the Netherlands. And I'm looking forward to this session.
Great, thank you very much. Now we've got, not only have we got our panel, but obviously we've got you as our audience here today. So we would like you to be engaged as much as possible. So we're using Slido to do that. This is how you do so. Make sure if you're going onto Slido, which you can do via your app, that you select the right conference room. So we are conference room 3. Otherwise, I will be asking very odd questions to our panel, and you will be asking odd questions to another panel, which isn't probably the way we plan this. Might be more entertaining, I don't know. But please do ask questions whenever you like. Either I'll try and ask them during the course of the session, or we'll ask them at the end. It just depends. If we don't have time to answer all your questions, then I'm sure our panel will be very happy to answer questions afterwards, either one-to-one or during the cocktail party, which starts at 5 o'clock this evening. So without further ado, let's move on to our theme, which is what's next on the corporate wish list for GPI. So I think what I'd like to start with is to talk to our pet corporates who are here today and really understand from you what some of your pain points really are in the payments process. What are the things you're struggling with? So Brooke, perhaps I can ask you first.
Sure. I think if you're not in corporate treasury or banking, did they get the money is a really simple, stupid question, but most of the time I can't answer it. So when Swift started talking about a way for us to know if a payment was received by a vendor, give us transparency into correspondent banking, it seemed like the simplest answer ever. So we're really excited to be able to answer that question finally. Do they have the money? We spend an inordinate amount of time in hours looking up payments, sending screenshots to people that we've made the payments. So to alleviate that would be great.
So it's certainty of payment and transparency of that payment process then. Great. And Bart, what would you add to that?
Yeah, I mean, those 2 points are the same for us as well. But next to that, I would like to highlight 2 points. One is FX. The other is more or less we send a payment as hour. So you would expect then you have some certainty or some control about the fees.
So an hour payment is where you are taking the fees on a cross-border payment.
Yeah, that's what I mean. And what we see from our experience is that not all the banks actually treat it like an hour payment. So there's still fees, and that's not really what you expect if you make such a payment. So I don't know why that happens. Maybe somebody in the room can tell me. But and I think Swift GPI is making a promise there to have more insight in fees. The other thing, what we see is FX, and the FX component mainly in terms of double conversions. So what we see, we have bank accounts of Booking.com, for example, in dollars in Europe. What we see is that banks think, oh, Booking.com, it's a company in the Netherlands or in Europe, so let's already convert it to euros, where actually the money is going to a dollar account. So then the euros need to convert it back into dollar again. So there's a double conversion, and that's something that's happened sometimes in Europe where you would not expect it, and it's mainly an issue for us in the Middle East, where we have multiple currencies in the UAE, and for example, we see a payment exactly the same what I just described between euro and dollar, but more than in the currencies in the UAE. So that's why we like to have, why we think that Swift GPI can make a difference.
Right. So from what Brooke said, obviously there's the certainty of the payment issue in terms of knowing where your payment is and when it's going to arrive. And added to that, it's the uncertainty about the value of the payment, depending on what the deductions have been along the way.
Absolutely.
And JP, these issues aren't really just a problem for the corporates, are they?
Well, from the bank standpoint, we see the corporates' problems in several ways. One is if you go to our call centers, although nowadays our call centers are pretty quiet because the majority of our inquiries come in via emails. And actually, because of cross-border payments and the flows are growing, and it's easier for our corporate clients to just shoot an email instead of calling, although they're welcome to call. They'll call us or email us and ask us exactly these questions about a status of a payment, or why did the payment come in for a certain value, why was there an FX conversion, and so forth. So it's a pain point as well for the banks, and the banks have to do something about it. And one of the other reasons to do something about it is, in conferences like this, a lot of people talk about fintech, and my interest in fintech is to find out where are the fintechs investing their time in, and they're going to invest in their time where there are client pain points, and you see fintechs definitely looking at cross-border payments. So when you put these factors together, we're very supportive of Swift GPI because it's definitely a client pain point that we see. And for us, we don't want our clients to have to email or call us. We'd like to find a better way to give them that information. I know it's, and therefore we think it's something that needs to be addressed sooner rather than later.
Great. And going back to Booking.com and to Viacom, what has specifically prompted your interest in cross-border payment innovation? Obviously, you've talked about your pain points, but what is it that's particularly attracted you to this initiative? And perhaps I'll ask you first, Bart.
Yeah, sure. I think as a tech company, which we are effectively, we always want to follow all the trends and see what's going on, what can we do extra, what we can do ultimately to give the best experience also to our customer, and to see what we can do and to really be the front runner there. And that's why we want to join these initiatives.
Great. And Brooke?
Yeah, I completely agree. I think that we want that certainty. We want to know where fees are being deducted. We want to know what amount the final vendor's getting. So that's all very, very critical information that we don't have today.
Understand. So we've heard, this is now addressing Soren and JP. We've heard from Brooke and from Bart about some of the pain points and the triggers that have attracted them to GPI. But how do you see demand from other corporate clients that you've worked with? Soren, perhaps I can ask you first.
Well, I think we share our corporates share some of the same views here. The transparency is important. And getting the dollars from A to B in the most efficient way is important. So this is a sort of a general ask from our corporate clientele, both large and small ones, and we address it in many different ways. I think for the cross-border payments, which we are addressing here today, the GPI is definitely one answer to that. But I also want to just maybe link on to what JP said, because it's also about efficiency, also in the banks.
Yeah.
So the more information we have on the payment streams, the better we are suited also to serve our clients, but also to cover some of our own needs. And the investigations part is one, but there's also an element of AML checking and so on, and therefore, the fewer times we need to go back and request more information, the better. And in the GPI structure, you do have a lot of information.
And JP, you obviously are talking to corporate clients all the time. What level of interest have you seen in amongst that corporate community?
I think for the larger corporates who are aware of SWIFT and SWIFT GPI, you definitely have interest, and you have Brooke here and Bart obviously explaining it better than me. I think as you go toward the smaller corporates, and at Bank of America we have a large commercial banking and small business banking franchise in the US, they have the same issue with cross-border payments. So they want to have that visibility. They want to know, why am I being charged X amount of fees? And we're seeing growing flows in line with globalization. So clients want to have the equivalent of that FedEx tracking number, right? If they're being asked about the status of a payment. And they want to understand, well, I was sending X amount in this currency, why did that amount not arrive in the account? So it's clearly demand tied to it, and we know that based on the stats that we see from our service center teams who receive all these email inquiries tied to cross-border payments.
No, absolutely.
Yeah. No, I would just wanted to add, if you turn back the clock a couple of years to Cyprus a couple of years ago, the banks got together and talked about this, because this at that time was a demand from our customers to facilitate something that could solve the needs we are just talking about. So there's, if that's what your question was about, there is definitely a corporate demand out there and a push to find a solution for this and create the transparency.
And I think the point that JP made was interesting too, is that while we tend to pitch these initiatives at the largest multinational corporates, the value proposition is at least as compelling actually at the smaller end as well. Although the volumes might well be lower, the sort of the potential risk and the potential cost is potentially much higher.
Yeah.
So.
And to some companies of smaller sizes, international business is perhaps even more important than for the large corporate multinational companies, and therefore it is really important that they know where their funds are. And our bank is a medium-sized European bank, right? And so our core customer clientele is the SMEs of this world. And that's also why we have made a conscious choice to go for the GPI and to introduce it across the whole segment of customers we have.
Great. Now, the value proposition of GPI is, as we know, in adoption. And unless we've got a very high level of adoption amongst banks across countries and across currency corridors, then the value proposition is significantly reduced. Looking at the banks first of all, and then I'll ask the two corporate speakers about their experiences working with their banks. But from a Danske and from a Bank of America point of view, how have you positioned GPI as a strategic priority?
Well, should I?
Whichever you want.
You're the CAG chair, so I was.
Okay, so I have preference.
You have more to say.
Allow the small guys in, is that what you're saying?
That's
That's
right.
the first time ever JP has said to someone else, "You've got more to say."
Well,
It's a compliment.
He just changed jobs, so that's why he's
okay,
still
good.
shirt and us too.
I used to be on the CAG, and then Soren became a chairman, and I got kicked out, right? So,
Yes.
so
What can we say?
yeah, exactly.
So, Soren, in your
Yes.
elevated position,
Exactly.
Then
So-
from your perspective, tell me about GPI as that strategic priority.
It's a strategic priority to our bank for the reasons I just mentioned before. The way we serve our customers at Danske Bank Group, we have an awful lot of customers who are active internationally, and they require from us services that can connect the dots across their supply chain and value chain, and therefore this is strategically important to us. We develop on our own different products and services in this space, and of course focus very much on the Nordic area and the individual countries which we operate in. But to have something that is meaningful in terms of cross-border, then this was a much better strategic choice for us, because it again connects the dots out also in the regions and the countries where we are not present ourselves. So that's the decision we took. From a CAG perspective, I think we all agreed that is the way to go. There was a strong support and a strong push in the discussions we had around this going back a few years.
Agreed.
Yeah, and the adoption is rapidly taking off. If you look at the numbers that SWIFT is presenting here at Cyprus. The number of banks that have signed up to the SLA and have committed to go live within 2018 is staggering. I think it's representing now over 75% of the total value of cross-border payments, and that is a strong adaptation, actually.
Yeah, no, and in a relatively short time
Absolutely,
as well.
yes.
Yeah, but I'm going to ask our two corporate speakers about that in just a moment, because I know that that's not always that isn't always going to solve the problem. It is the more complicated payments that perhaps where some of the value proposition really lies. But JP, perhaps I can follow on from what Søren was saying.
So it's a priority for us. By December, we'll be able to provide that information to our clients, whether they go to CashPro, which is our online portal, or they use CashPro Connect, so we can provide them the GPI reference number, either online or via a file. So that's the good news. It means that we obviously saw this as a priority. We want to provide that information to our corporate clients. I think the concern, going back to Søren's point, if banks are not providing that data, if the corporate goes a few times onto our portal and looks to get the information and doesn't see it, then we may lose the adoption, right? They're going to try it a couple times, this doesn't work, and then they'll move on. So we'll have to watch that, essentially, and to see how do we promote this to get the right corporate adoption. Because earlier this week at the AFP, we launched a digital assistant on CashPro Online, and it's all about redefining the client experience online. And technically by December, we could provide the GPI reference number via live chat if we want to. But the question is, do we really want to do that? Because if the clients live chat with us a couple times and don't get the information, then the proposition will fall flat on its face. So we want to see the bank adoption, see the quality of the data that we can get to our clients, and then we'll know whether this is going to make a real impact on client experience, reduce the number of email and call requests from our clients.
Right. So, Brooke and Bart, you've heard from Søren and JP about the growth and adoption, how strategic it's become for these two banks and others as well, the sort of investment that's going in. What's your experience from the other side, if you like, about your bank's genuine commitment and investment behind GPI and the value of that to you? Brooke, perhaps I'll ask you first.
Well, I know in today's world, one of the large, too big to fail U.S. banks has an inquiry module in their portal today, and I can't figure out how to use it. I'm pretty smart too with technology. Like, I can use it on my iPhone. Well, it's just, I can't seem to get the inquiry to go through. They don't get it. There's a lot of problems. So it's all in delivery, I think. The banks can have all the greatest information in the world, but if they don't get it to me in a way that I can access it and use it and regularly understand it, then it's useless to me. So that's really what's important. And from most of my major banks that I deal with, they are taking this very seriously. They are looking at enhancing their portals and making new search tools. But I think, to JP's point, the first point of rollout is going to be to their service people. So we're still, for the foreseeable future, going to be calling someone and saying, where's my money? So I would like to see it.
So that needs to be sort of the ability to interrogate information needs to be more closely integrated into your day-to-day experience.
Yes.
Then. Okay. And Bart?
Yeah, and I mean, the main thing is, of course, this is a super nice initiative, Swift GPI, but it only is going to work if all the banks, as much as possible, are really going to commit to it. And I mean, these guys, of course, they've committed to it. That's why they're on the stage. That's why it's not such a spectacular fight. Oh, sorry, such a spectacular fight yet. Well, he was trying, but I mean, these guys are going for it, which we like, and all of our main banking partners are going for it. But the main problem with international payments is not when I'm paying from Europe to the US. It's when I'm paying to Zimbabwe or to Kenya or in other markets where that last piece, maybe the last bank in the line, the last mile, as some people call it, that's really the thing. And if that bank doesn't sign up, it's nice, but the payment is stuck at the latest correspondent. So, yeah, then what am I going to do with that information? I still don't have the full information. So that's so extremely important that all the banks sign up to it and really commit to it. I personally, but I'm maybe a bit strongly opinionated about it, I would love that SWIFT just says, okay, it's going to be by that date, everybody needs to sign up. And then we can get something done. Otherwise, you have the same story about ISO, about Trieste, where we all were talking about for ages, and nothing really is happening, in my view, I have to say. But yeah, so that's one of the main things. And of course, I think what we also need to understand, and it's not only about high-value payments, it's also about the smaller payments that might be equally important. So yeah.
Particularly bearing in mind your business, you know, you're not dealing with enormous organizations all the time. You're often dealing with quite small organizations for whom that payment flow is incredibly important.
Absolutely, yeah.
Soren, no pressure based on what Bart said, but...
Let me try and respond. And maybe we'll have a fight later.
Yeah.
But there's, I clearly sense over the last couple of days here, walking about and talking to customers of our bank and to other banks, that there is already a mounting peer pressure on this one. So no doubt this is now accelerating, and many banks are actually looking at us and saying, okay, so are you a GPI bank? And yes, okay, ticking that box. So it's becoming part of a qualification process. Then to the answer, or to the question around, can SWIFT mandate or push or pressure or whatever, SWIFT probably won't do that. But what SWIFT has decided to do is, in the standards release for 2018, I believe, there will be a requirement for all banks to carry the unique identifier across the whole value chain from A to C. So also the intermediary banks and then the banks that decide not to go GPI will have to carry that through the message. So that is to safeguard that the information is accessible in the tracker along the whole. And let's see how that will work then.
I think going on from that, there's a brilliant question that's just come through from the audience, which is about, is putting pressure not on SWIFT, but putting pressure on banks such as yourselves, is to ask whether you as Danske and Bank of America would mandate your correspondent banks to support GPI? And I'm sorry if it's a very cruel question, but how would you respond to that?
You have the biggest stick, so
You know, it's
We're not asking for commitment here.
It's a good
it's
question.
Okay.
No, don't worry.
Oh, I am, yeah. Let's see.
He's asking for commitment.
You know, if we were in a business where I did not have competitors, then yeah, mandate tomorrow. You know, you have to feed GPI. So I think that you know, it's an interesting proposition. I think the question is more around what can we do to engage with our banks to get them to adopt GPI. My personal view, being from the bank side, and maybe throwing it back to the corporates a little bit, but I see the best adoption is when a client says, you want to get my business, you have to do this. Yeah. And they can drive bank behavior as well. I mean, the reason we are doing GPI and we're going to be live by December is we know that this is a client paid point that they want us to do. So the corporates have mandated this on us, not the banks. So my view is, I'd love to mandate it, but you know, I'm in a business where I do compete for clearing, and you know, be hard to do unless you know all of my competitors would do the same.
Yeah. So it's up to Brooke and to Bart to mandate
I
their
think
banks.
that's a little. I mean, I'll just say EBAM.
Okay.
You know, I think that a lot of corporates that I spoke to at these conferences over the years really wanted a standard, really wanted this to work, and quite honestly, it doesn't. You know, there may be a few select cases where it works okay, but it's not something that works. And I don't know that the corporates individually have enough strength to affect change like that. I think that there needs to be an agreement maybe, or to have that level of change.
Very good. Soren, you wanted to add to that?
I think the topic of the discussion was on the corporate wish list, what would be next. And I think if I look at it from, well, both from the bank's point of view, but also from SWIFT's point of view, there is an ambition to take this a few steps further. Yeah. And so now the tracker is about payments, but there's also ideas about could it be extended further into the value chain, supply chain. In discussions in the CAG, we talk about, okay, so maybe the unique identifier should be created very early on in the commercial trade and then basically travel across the whole value chain. We are talking about trade finance as a next possible area for this. So it's all about the information and the sharing of information and making it available, readily available, easily available to all parties in the chain.
Yeah. So, as you say, the sort of what we want to pull out today is some of the, I suppose, the outstanding issues or the gaps perhaps that we see in the current roadmap for GPI, where we would like to see in future phases, of course. So I'm going to ask whether there are any sort of concerns that you see at the moment where you don't think that GPI is going to fulfill those pain points we talked about earlier, at least initially. Clearly it's already moving very fast and not everything can be done up front. But what would you like to see in terms of either additional functionality or just things that are going to be very important from your point of view? And I know from a banking point of view, you'll have perspectives on that as well. Perhaps I might ask you first, JP, actually, about that because I can, and you caught my eye, which is always dangerous. And I suppose one of those issues comes back to adoption.
Yep. So my concern from a bank standpoint would be twofold. One is a lack of adoption, which I think the corporates would share that concern as well. I think if we don't have that adoption, as I said earlier, if the corporate uses it a couple times, whether we feed them the information via file, or they go to our portal, if they don't get it, they don't get the right end result, then they're going to go back to emails and calls, which is not what we would prefer. The other concern will be over, and I think it's a good concern for the industry, but is the visibility on fees, right? So we know that the fees have been out there for some time. There are people who have been on the product side, and we are at that place in Bank of America Merrill Lynch to really question the size of some of these correspondent banking fees that you see out there being deducted in the transaction. So having that visibility, one concern is clearly, and it's a good one, my corporates will be able to see what are those fees through the value chain. Whether a bank, for example, that has a very big network, if you initiate a transaction in the US and they use their own network and yet along the value chain their various branches take fees, that to me is the wrong kind of practice, and corporates will get that visibility. So I think the concern is a plus, because in our business we want our clients to have visibility over what we charge them, and this is one tool that they'll have. And I think it's going to change maybe some of the practice out there where some banks have probably charged the wrong type of fees to their corporates.
And this talks very much to the points that Bart was making earlier about unexpected fees, unexpected foreign exchange amounts. From your point of view, Brooke and Bart, where do you see not necessarily just the gaps, but the things you would like GPI to be delivering to you in the future?
Yeah, well, there's one thing, I think that's a common theme across the conference, it's all about speed of payment, but one important thing for us is also the quality of the payment, and what I mean is the data that comes with the payment. So the reference, or maybe what's also one down the line in the GPI initiative is the enriched data in the statement. So for us, okay, maybe it's because we get a lot of euros and euro rates are quite bad. So I would rather have a payment 2 days later with all the right information and the hotel ID or all the remittance information than having the money earlier or straight to it 24/7. Or we'll be talking about the whole conference, but that quality is also so much more important than I think generally known. And that's just one of the things.
So it's not just speed you're looking for; it's actually quality of information is more important than speed.
And then there's the potential functionality of canceling a payment. I don't know. It would be a nice question for the room, but for a corporate of the size of Viacom or Booking.com, how many mistakes are made? Do you think? Or I would say per year or per month. How many times would you have to like that option to maybe retract the payment? Any thoughts?
Never.
No? Zero? No, it's not zero. So it's actually happening. So that opportunity and that will be actually really nice to be able to do
So
that.
the ability to stop a payment would
Exactly,
be valuable.
yeah.
Okay. And we talk about stopping payments, and at times that is due to errors, as you mentioned,
Yep.
perhaps duplication of payments. And I know Brooke mentioned earlier that if you do that, then perhaps you're out of a job. But also there's the fraud event
Yes.
issue as well, which I'm sure we'll talk about in a moment, relating to the banks, which again probably you get fired for as well. So I suppose the usage might be different, the impact is probably the same, but
It would be great if you have the opportunity to not be fired, right?
that's really what we're all looking for, is the tools to prevent mistakes, whether those are mistakes that have been generated internally or whether they're breaches that have happened externally. But Søren, you looked like you were going to
No, I just
add
wanted
to
to
that.
add exactly what you said, because the stopping of a payment, yes, it can be based on a mistake done in the back office or in the treasury, but it
Not
could also
treasury,
be
back office.
yeah, back office. Sorry. So it could also be, as you just said, fraud, and that I think is becoming more and more apparent to all of us that is the big threat out there, and if we can help each other through means like the GPI to be on top of things, and if we see it, if we spot it, have an immediate availability to stop something, before it's actually executed, because once the funds are there, they're gone, right? So we need to find ways to counter that.
Yeah, no, absolutely. Anything you'd add, Jay?
No, I fully agree. I mean, I like Bart's idea on the view on stopping payments. One, if there's a payment duplication, but more importantly, if you also have a fraud and a corporate wants to essentially stop that fraud. I mean, what essentially we're hearing from Bart and Brooke here is that they want to use GPI to have further access, whether it's visibility or the ability to stop a payment across the network of banks. And we're here at Sibos because we're a network of banks who work together, and we are a network because our corporate clients use us. And so the idea of GPI would be not only to get adoption for that visibility, but also the ability to access a network, which is what we use Swift for, to communicate among banks. So that would be very powerful, and obviously something that would further improve the client experience that my corporate clients have with Bank of America Merrill Lynch.
Bart, one point you mentioned was the importance of quality of information about a payment. So, for example, in your case, the hotel ID and that type of information on a payment, having that information on a payment 2 days later being more important than having it today without that information. One of the pros, but also the potential cons of GPI is volume of data, particularly to do with if you're tracking a payment, how many new statuses you have on a payment. And that creates some workflow issues from a corporate perspective, presumably, in how you filter and how you process that data. Have you given any thought to how you're going to sort of shape that set of data that you're receiving to make it meaningful?
Yeah, that's indeed a very good point, and that's also why in the pilot phase we'll also try to see, can we use one of the big ERP systems, and also have a discussion with them to see how do they feel about it, because ultimately if we can log into our ERP system, which is probably open anyway, and you can quickly check something there, either via the paying messages or via another type, that will be extremely helpful, because you don't want to track all the payments. The payments that are going fine are going fine, so you don't need to do anything about them. It's the problems that you want to investigate. And if you can do that from a corporate perspective in one place, that would be ideal. We can of course also log into CashPro and check what the status is there. But if you have it into your own ERP system, that would be the ideal scenario.
Brooke, anything you would add to that?
Well, I kind of wanted to add something to the wish list, if I could.
Perfect.
Want more?
Yeah, so most of the payments that we send are not high value or MT101 payments. That represents a very small fraction. All of our tax payments, most of our general vendor payments worldwide go through file act. They go in ISO XML format. So even if GPI is successful for the 101s, the vast majority of my payments, I'm still going to be calling JP's team saying, where's this tax payment? I don't see it because it was sent via ACH through the Nata network. So if we're talking about doing this, I'd like to see it rolled out through the other clearing networks that exist in the world. I think that would be probably phase 2, I'm assuming, but hopefully
I would
phase
say
2.
so.
I just think that the vast volume of payments that we send are not in scope for this.
Yeah. So you've got that. Obviously, as a corporate, you've got so many. It's not just cross-border payments that you're
Unless
looking
they're going
at.
to lower
And-
the price on wire
Yeah.
transfers, we're going to continue to operate sending files.
Yeah, understand. So I don't know whether Soren and JP, you've got any thoughts based on the things we've talked about to do with, say, tracking data, to do with that consistency of transparency and sort of in ability to interrogate, whether you've had any thoughts on those things.
Plenty of thoughts and lots of good comments. And I think we are just in the phase now. It's so early days, right? So we're all still struggling as to how do we actually apply this, where this is relevant. Should we share all information? Should you pull it down from the cloud? Should you just feed it into your system? Should we overload? There's a balance, fine balance that we all need to find here in all of this. And not excluding anything, but trying to include what is relevant to include. So I think that's going to be a dialogue which we're going to have in the industry with our corporate customers over the next phase. And the wish list is getting longer and longer. And it's back to Swift then, of course, to prioritize, okay, so from which end will we start?
Yeah, I think that's a great point. And I think that's one of the real points where I see the value now compared with even sort of 9 months ago is corporates being very directly engaged in the dialogue about the wish list and prioritizing it and really looking about how that wish list translates into real life processes.
I think it fits well also in the way we think innovation, at least at both at our banks. We want to incorporate the wishes very early on and co-develop, if you will. And I think this is one area where we can definitely do that.
Yes, I agree with Soren. I think it's going to come down as we provide this to our clients toward the later part of the year. How do clients use it? How will they access it? Are they more going to go online to look at a specific transaction, or do they want that data coming through a file? And so, as he said, as corporates start consuming the data, we'll then have a better idea of what kind of user experience they're expecting from us.
Understand. Sorry.
We are live, by the way, so we are starting collecting now.
No, we're live as well in terms of feeding. It's more like now they can pick up the data and search
We
it.
got a little bit of one-upmanship going on here.
I'm trying to pick a fight.
I'm more live than you are. Yeah.
Yeah, but I think, Søren, you're making a very good point, and that's something that we actually see from a corporate perspective as well, is that banks engage us more and more earlier when new things are coming up. I think we are a company that's very clear about what we want. We're always annoying our bankers about innovation, about the new things, about the next thing that we can do. But it means that we're involved at an earlier stage, and also Swift is doing a great job in that, and having set up a corporate panel to have the views from the corporate world and bringing that in combination with each other. So that's
No,
that's why we're sitting in a row and not against each other.
No, exactly, and I think that sums it up very well. Actually, is that this is a one community dialogue now.
Yeah.
And talking about that one community, one of the questions that came through, I think, was a very good one, which is about the fact that to really see GPI adoption engages obviously banks, engages corporates, but it also needs to engage the technology providers as well, both the ERP and treasury management and payment system providers, but also the vendors that are supporting the banks, particularly the small and medium-sized banks. Any thoughts on that engagement at all that you are already seeing or expect to see in the future?
So in regards to engaging the tech vendors, I can't speak to the vendor for the smaller banks, but we are spending time with the likes of Oracle, SAP, and Microsoft, which is also a growing ERP provider to its Dynamics platform. And so we are very much engaging with them to not only help facilitate the implementation of our clients, the flow of of transactions, but also do the other part, which is to enable our clients to get the servicing they need. So we are very much engaged with them in looking at how do they use the GTPI data that we could push to them. Therefore, to them, meaning the environment that they provide to our clients. And they're a key part of the conversation. It can't just be a couple of banks, as we've discussed. It's got to be the whole bank community, as well as the tech providers. Now, going back to Brooke's comments about higher value transactions, maybe the engagement needs to also have a more focus on this from the treasury workstation providers, the likes of FIS and Kyriba and others, because that's probably more of these types of transactions that corporates may want to query. So it's got to include the technology vendors as well, and I think it is.
Right. Anything you'd add to that?
No, I think I concur with that.
Yeah. I mean, Bart and Brooke, I know you use FIS for your treasury management solution.
No, we use
You don't use.
ITQ.
Okay, sorry, I was getting confused with the payment side. What engagement are you having with your vendors on some of your evolving needs on GPI, for example?
We actually haven't started talking to
Okay.
either our ERP or treasury management system vendor yet. I don't think that I have enough details. You know, the banks are coming to us and asking us questions and showing decks and presentations with pretty graphics on them and stuff right now. So I don't know that we actually have enough information to say, all right, in field,
Yeah.
6, can you parse this into here? Which is basically where I think we need to go.
So once you've got that additional detail about how your processes will be affected and your data flows, obviously you'll be able to engage in
Yes.
more in that dialogue. And Bart, have you had any discussions yet?
No,
No.
not yet.
Well, that's
actually.
going to be the next
Probably,
stage.
probably
for
I
this.
need to create a ticket and prioritize in my SAP department, and then.
Oh, tickets.
Fair enough.
I think this is probably what's going on now. We've been engaged in the dialogue between banks and corporates and SWIFTs, and we've probably just recently started the dialogue with the system providers, and that's going to be accelerated, of course, so that we can get the whole ecosystem to work.
No, absolutely. So we know that that GPI isn't the only initiative that's going on in the cross-border innovation space. How do you think GPI fits into that broader cross-border innovation agenda, I'll call it? Obviously, there are different providers providing slightly different value proposition, but we also see a lot going on the domestic space in terms of real-time payments. How do you see, and perhaps I'll ask JP first of all, about how you see GPI as part of that broader payment innovation agenda?
So I look at it in two ways. One is, as I said earlier, we are seeing fintechs, and there are multiple ones that are out there with a solution that technically competes with SWIFT, whereby the messaging can be done between two banks, and they're trying to move toward also doing the settlement by having their own digital currency. And so that's definitely one option the banks have. We're not seeing, I think, the adoption that we had discussed maybe 2 Cybuses ago, maybe last year. And we are seeing banks trying to build bank-to-bank corridors. So when you think about that, I think SWIFT GPI is extremely important, because the fact that people are doing that means that there must be some sort of pain points around cross-border payments. And I don't necessarily think it's the fault of SWIFT or the bank. It's just that we've been doing cross-border payments this way for numbers and numbers of years, and we need to address the client pain points. Otherwise, other providers could go in there and essentially potentially address that pain point of visibility, real-time movement of funds, and so forth. So that's one item. The other one around real-time payments, I think real-time payments solves a different issue for corporates. One, I think most of our corporates are looking at real-time payments as an opportunity to digitize or improve their collection flows. So on the inbound would be one of my perspective. And then the other one, if they decide that they want to do real-time payments on the outflow, as Brooke explained, this is often, they often use wires for large ticket transactions, as most real-time payment systems that are being implemented tend to have a cap a ceiling on the amount that you can send. So I think that's just a different phenomenon, and that's more, I think, corporates trying to address a different type of expense in their treasury, not their cross-border or even domestic wire fees. They're looking at their merchant acquiring fees and how much they're spending to collect credit cards, and they would rather move that toward real time to either lower that expense or be able to collect more efficiently in markets like India and China.
Mm-hmm. And I'll ask Bart in particular about that in a moment. Particularly, I know some of the initiatives you've got on the payment side, which are quite interesting. But Søren, anything you would add to what JP's mentioned?
A few things. I mean, you talked about other initiatives ongoing out there. I think one of the things that the GPI shows is that the old system actually works. We're using the existing rails, using all the values that SWIFT represents, and the connectivity that is now already well established and well proven creates certainty and security for the parties in the payment. So I think that's an important point to raise here. Linking that into the terminology of instant payments. When we look at the first flow of payments in the GPI now coming over the network, it actually shows quite dramatically change of time spent out in the air. So to the extent that you could almost say that we are now, through the old systems, seeing real-time payments happening. Now then there's part of that ecosystem also. SWIFT is just cross-border, but then you have the local clearing systems
and that's
that it
what
needs
Brooke
to...
was talking about as well, of course.
Which it needs to connect to, and there you see, if you have a map of the world, you now see more and more countries, regions being real-time, instant payment, 24/7 ready. And it's just accelerating. So I think if you see that in combination, we are not far away from that nirvana, if you will, through the existing cost-efficient and secure system we have.
Great. Now that's really, really interesting. And I wanted to ask you, Bart, specifically actually about some of your experiences in sort of wider payments innovation, because I know you're working not just with banks, but also with fintechs and payment service providers as well to create that more integrated payment and collection flows.
Yeah, absolutely. First of all, I have to agree, and that's also, I think, why we as a corporate are on the heavily included with the GPI initiative, because we believe that the current system that's there, I mean, that's working, right? And it's nice that people say, okay, you can build an API, but still the banks need to communicate, and all of that in the back end of the system, the back end of the banks also need to be aligned. But to get back to your question, yes, we work together with some fintechs, mainly on the payout side with PSPs, but also on the receivable side. And receivable side is really something that's most important for us. We basically try to make it as easy as possible for our hotels to pay us. And traditionally, that's always been via non-resident bank account in local market. But we see that a local bank account, for sure, in markets where that's not as normal. For example, in Africa, we work together with M-Pesa, and that's something that makes it just so much easier for our partners, our hotels, to pay us. So that's why we try to have an approach of both banking solutions, but also in combination with the fintechs.
Mm-hmm.
Great. If anyone wants to ask any final questions, then probably now is the time to pop it into the system now, if that's feasible. Looking back on what we've heard from so far, I'm trying to sort of, in my mind, create that wish list that we've talked about and try and summarize back some of the things we've talked about. I think at the beginning we talked about predictability and certainty of payment, and I know that was a very important issue for Brooke. Added to that, it's not only predictability of timing, but Bart also talked about the predictability of value as well, particularly when it comes to deductions of fees and foreign exchange. Brooke also added to that as well the not just predictability and certainty when it came to cross-border flows, but bearing in mind that's only one portion of your total volume, or rather empty, 101s are only part of what you do.
Very small.
It needs to be something that's far more standardized across the payment flows, not just that small portion of them. We also talked about the potential value of the stop payment feature in order that we will keep our jobs, whether that's as a result of internal mistake or external breach. Anything that I've missed that we would add to that list of things that we haven't? I've just remembered one more, which was to do with the quality of the data, which Bart mentioned, so that speed of payment perhaps less important than the quality and the reliability of the information that accompanies the payment for reconciliation purposes, for example. Anything that I have missed?
Well, the main one, I think you've covered it, is we need bank participation in GPI, right, to address what the corporates are looking for, which is better data. And from my perspective, when we look at this as an opportunity, often banks tend to think this is a new tool, new product, and therefore it's all about top line growth. I think this is about efficiency.
Yes.
Yep.
And remaining relevant to your clients, right? Efficiency. Reduce the emails, the calls, and the client frustration, and remaining relevant. If you want to be the cash management bank of your clients, you have to give them what they expect out of you. So it's almost like banks should look at that as an opportunity to reduce expenses, and I think we're doing that anyway as an industry. If you look at most of the large banks and transaction services, the growth is not, is in the 5 to 10%, but the margin tends to be at 20%. So we are becoming more digitally efficient,
Yep.
and therefore a GPI adoption is to increase that efficiency, not necessarily a top-line exercise. Actually, could be the other way. I think corporates are going to go back and revisit some of the fees that we charge, and I think we need to address that as an industry, if that's not already been done.
Understand.
That's-
Bart.
Oh, it's just great to hear that the bank has so many efficiencies, which means, of course, that we don't have to pay more for GPI, which, yeah.
Which is a bonus.
Oh, sorry, was told before
He got very
the
excited about
presentation
saving
started.
bank fees.
Do not move around, but I'm
we've
still
been
doing it.
These chairs are absolutely lethal. So,
Sorry, just to see if everybody's still awake. Yes, of course. I mean, the cost is an important perspective, and we're always looking at the cost. We don't want to pay. I don't think we want to pay much more for GPI. So yeah, that's great.
And that's what I'm saying, Bart.
Yeah,
I don't think
exactly.
it's something you're going to charge incremental for.
Can I hold you to that?
What?
We can hold you to that?
Yeah, well, your office is 2 blocks away. So if you don't like your statement, Brooke, I'll happily see you.
So
we can discuss.
I've got one final question from the floor, but before I do that, then Søren.
No, just adding to it very briefly, I think 2 comments here. One is to my friends in the banking community: embrace this. Don't see it as a threat. And guys, if you don't embrace it, you'll ultimately be out of business, right? And the second thing is to my friends in the corporate space, keep coming back to us with a wish list, because this is something that we have to do jointly and work together on.
And I don't think there's going to be any reluctance to bring that wish list, actually. I think increasingly that dialogue is becoming closer and richer, actually, which I think is really bearing fruit if you compare the discussions we're having in 2017, even compared with 2 years ago. I think the quality of that corporate bank dialogue is much greater. The question that's come through from the floor is actually a question for Brooke and for Bart, which is looking at the value of GPI, not just from a payment point of view, but from a collection point of view, is what you see the value of GPI could be when it comes to reconciliation, for example. And Bart sort of alluded to it already, but anything you would add about the value from a collection flow point of view rather than simply a outgoing payment flow?
I mean, certainly from the certainty point of view, someone saying that they paid you and actually being able to trace it through is mind-bogglingly cool to be able to do and say, it's not the check is in the mail anymore. We can see that you've sent the payment. It's in the pipeline. Yeah. With regard to data and matching, all of our ERP systems do all these fancy matchings and clear AR, but if there's not enough data there, not enough information, it's not going to work. So the quality, to Bart's point, is very important, and to the extent that this can improve that and enhance that data that we're getting, would be an improvement in our efficiency.
So that quality of data is essential from a payer and a payee point of view then. Okay. Anything you would add, Bart?
No, I mean, that's key. We have a big team of credit controllers, basically after all the payments. And one of the standard questions they ask is, okay, can we have the MT103? Can we have? Why do they need to ask that? With Swift GPI, we can actually, ask for and look ourselves, and that will be such a big pain relief for our hotel partners and for ourselves.
So the ability to interrogate incoming flows as well as outgoing.
Yeah, I would say even equally important for us.
Absolutely.
Great. Well, we've come to the end of our session then today, and I'd like to thank our panel very much indeed. We will certainly hand over this corporate wish list to Swift, who I'm sure will give it every consideration. But thank you very much for your time, and thank you for your excellent questions today as well. So thank you very much.